There's a peculiar silence that settles over a room when you're the only one left to remember what it used to sound like. Tonight, I sit at the head of a table that once overflowed with laughter, the clatter of cutlery and the gentle hum of voices weaving stories late into the night. The chandelier above me casts a golden glow, illuminating the polished wood and the empty chairs that line either side. But it's the one directly across from me, the one that used to be mine, that draws my gaze and refuses to let go. I never imagined I'd become a stranger in this house, let alone at this table. Years ago, I was welcomed here as a son, not by blood, but by trust and effort, by the sweat of my brow and the sincerity of my heart. My father-in-law, a man of few words but deep convictions, once told me, "Imran, this family is yours as much as it is mine." I believed him. I believed in the promise of belonging, in the idea that loyalty and hard work could carve out a place for me, among people who had known each other all their lives. That chair, my chair, was more than just a seat. It was a symbol of acceptance, of the countless evenings I spent discussing business strategies, family matters, and dreams for the future. I remember the first time I sat there, nervous but hopeful, as my wife Sarah squeezed my hand under the table. Her father nodded at me, a silent gesture of approval, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. I was home, but homes are fragile things, aren't they? They can be built on trust, but they can just as easily be dismantled by suspicion, jealousy, and the slow, corrosive drip of resentment. I didn't see it coming, or maybe I did, but I was too blinded by gratitude to notice the warning signs, the sidelong glances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. The way Adil, my brother-in-law, would tighten his jaw whenever my name was mentioned. It's strange how quickly everything can change. One day you're the favored son, the confidant, the man everyone turns to for advice. The next you're an outsider, your loyalty questioned, your intentions doubted. I still remember the night it all began to unravel. The air was thick with tension, though no one spoke of it. Sarah's eyes darted away from mine, and my father-in-law's laughter sounded forced, brittle. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just the stress of a big business deal looming over us. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Now, as I sit here, the echoes of those happier times haunt me. I can almost hear the clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of Sarah's voice as she recounted stories from her childhood, the booming laughter of my father-in-law when Adil made one of his rare jokes. I close my eyes and let the memories wash over me, bittersweet and sharp, each one a reminder of what I've lost. People say time heals all wounds, but I've learned that some wounds don't heal. They simply become a part of you, shaping the way you see the world and the people in it. I've spent countless nights replaying every conversation, every decision, searching for the moment when the ground began to shift beneath my feet. Was it when I closed that deal that made the family business soar? Was it when I started to be seen as more than just the helpful son-in-law, but as a threat to someone else's legacy? I wish I could say I saw it coming, that I was prepared for the betrayal that would follow. But the truth is, I was blindsided. The people I trusted most, the ones I would have given everything for, were the very ones who orchestrated my downfall. And yet, as I sit here staring at that empty chair, I realize that this story isn't just about loss. It's about what comes after, the slow, painful process of rebuilding, of finding strength in the ruins, of learning to forgive not just others, but myself. There's a lesson in every empty chair, a story in every silence. Mine is a story of trust broken and dignity reclaimed, of a man who lost everything he thought mattered, only to discover what truly does. I don't know if I'll ever sit at this table as a son again, or if the wounds will ever fully close. But I do know this. The journey from betrayal to healing is never a straight line. It's a winding path, filled with shadows and unexpected light, and it begins with the courage to face the emptiness head-on. So tonight I sit here not as a victim, but as a witness to my own story. The chair may be empty, but my resolve is not. And as I look around this room, I can't help but wonder, how many others have found themselves staring at an empty chair, wondering where it all went wrong? If you have, know that you're not alone. Our stories may be different, but the ache of loss and the hope for redemption are threads that bind us all. If I close my eyes, I can still feel the warmth of those early days, the golden years as I've come to call them. It's strange how memory works, how it can transport you back to a time when hope was as abundant as sunlight, and every day felt like a new beginning. I remember the first morning I woke up beside Sarah as her husband, the way the light filtered through the curtains, painting her face in soft gold. She smiled at me, sleepy and content, and in that moment I believed that happiness could be simple. that love and hard work would be enough to build a life worth living. Sarah and I were young, but we were determined. We moved into her family's home, a sprawling house that seemed to breathe with history and tradition. Her father, Mr. Rahman, was a man of stature, respected in the community, feared in the boardroom, but gentle with his family. He welcomed me with a firm handshake and a rare, approving smile. "Imran, you're one of us now," he said, and I felt the weight of those words settle on my shoulders like a mantle. I was eager to prove myself worthy. Those first years were a whirlwind of learning and laughter. I threw myself into the family business, eager to contribute, to show that I was more than just the man who married his daughter. Mr. Rahman took me under his wing, teaching me the intricacies of the textile trade, the delicate art of negotiation, the importance of reputation. We'd spend long evenings in his study, poring over ledgers and contracts, his voice low and patient as he explained the logic behind every decision. Sometimes he'd pause, look at me over his glasses, and ask, "What do you think, Imran?" The first time he did, I stumbled over my words, nervous and unsure. But he listened, really listened, and when I finished, he nodded. "Good. You see things differently. That's valuable." It wasn't just business that bonded us. There were Sunday afternoons spent in the garden, tending to the roses he loved so much. He'd hand me the pruning shears and talk about his own father, about the sacrifices that built the foundation we stood on. "Family is everything," he'd say, his hands deep in the earth. "We build for those who come after us." I took those words to heart, letting them guide me in every decision, every late night spent working, every risk I took for the sake of our future. Sarah was my anchor through it all. She believed in me even when I doubted myself. On the nights when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me, she'd bring me a cup of tea, her eyes shining with pride. "You're making a difference," she'd whisper, and I'd find the strength to keep going. We dreamed together of a home filled with laughter, of children running through the halls, of a legacy that would outlast us both. Adil, my brother-in-law, was different. He was younger, restless, always chasing the next thrill. In those days, I thought his distance was just a phase, a symptom of youth. I tried to include him, to bridge the gap between us. Sometimes he'd join us in the study, listening quietly as his father and I discussed business. Other times, he'd disappear for days, returning with stories of new ventures and wild ideas. Mr. Rahman would shake his head, a mixture of amusement and frustration in his eyes. "He'll find his way," he'd say. "Give him time." The business flourished in those years. Together, Mr. Rahman and I expanded into new markets, took calculated risks that paid off handsomely. I remember the day we signed our first international contract, a moment of triumph that felt like the culmination of all our hard work. Mr. Rahman clapped me on the back, his eyes shining with pride. "We did it, Imran, you and I." That night, the whole family gathered around the table, toasting to our success. Even Adil smiled, raising his glass in a rare gesture of camaraderie. There were challenges, of course. No journey worth taking is without its storms. There were deals that fell through, competitors who played dirty, moments when the future seemed uncertain. But through it all, we stood together. Mr. Rahman's faith in me never wavered, and I drew strength from his confidence. He began to introduce me as his right hand, a title that filled me with both pride and responsibility. I worked harder, determined to honor the trust he'd placed in me. The family grew closer during those years. We celebrated every milestone, birthdays, anniversaries, even the small victories that might have gone unnoticed in another household. Sarah and I hosted dinners, filling the house with friends and laughter. I remember one evening in particular, when the power went out during a storm. We lit candles and gathered in the living room, telling stories and singing old songs. Mr. Rahman, usually so reserved, joined in, his deep voice carrying the melody. For a moment, it felt as if nothing could touch us, as if the world outside had faded away, leaving only the warmth of family. Looking back, I realize how much I invested in those years. Not just my time and energy, but my heart, my very sense of self. I wanted so badly to belong, to prove that I was worthy of the love and trust I'd been given. I poured everything I had into the business, into the family, believing that loyalty and hard work would be enough to secure my place. But even in those golden years, there were shadows I chose not to see. Moments when Adil's laughter sounded hollow, when Sarah's smile faltered for just a second too long. I brushed them aside, unwilling to believe that anything could threaten the harmony we'd built. I told myself that love was stronger than envy, that trust could weather any storm. Now, as I sit here sifting through these memories, I see them for what they were. Precious, yes, but also fragile. The bonds we forged were real, but they were not unbreakable. I gave everything I had to this family, to this dream, never imagining that the very foundation I helped build could one day be used to push me out. Still, I cherish those golden years. They were a time of hope, of shared dreams and hard-won victories. They taught me the value of trust, the importance of perseverance, and the bittersweet truth that even the brightest days can cast the longest shadows. If I could go back, I would do it all again. Not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Because for a time I was part of something bigger than myself, a family, a legacy, a promise of belonging. And that, despite everything that followed, is a memory I will always hold close. It's strange how the smallest things can unsettle a man. How a single look or a half-finished sentence can echo louder than any argument. In those days, I told myself that the golden years would last forever, that the warmth of family could shield us from any storm. But even the sunniest afternoons can be marred by a sudden chill. And I began to notice the subtle shifts that signaled a change in the air. It started with Adil. He was always restless, but now his restlessness had an edge to it, a sharpness I hadn't seen before. He'd come late to family dinners, his excuses growing more creative and less believable. When he did join us, he'd sit at the far end of the table, his eyes fixed on his phone or the window, barely touching his food. I tried to draw him out, to include him in conversations about the business, but he'd shrug off my questions or respond with a joke that didn't quite land. Once when I mentioned a new contract we'd secured, he muttered, "Must be nice to have all the answers," just loud enough for me to hear. I laughed it off, but the words lingered. There were other moments too, small, almost imperceptible slights that I tried to ignore. Adil would roll his eyes when Mr. Rahman praised my work, or he'd interrupt me mid-sentence with a dismissive wave. At first I chalked it up to sibling rivalry, the kind that fades with time. But as the weeks passed, the tension grew harder to dismiss. I'd walk into a room and find Adil and Sarah deep in conversation, their voices dropping to a whisper as soon as they saw me. When I asked what they were discussing, Sarah would smile and say, "Just family stuff. Nothing important," but her eyes darted away, and I felt a flicker of unease. I tried to talk to Sarah about it one night, after the house had gone quiet. We sat on the balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I told her I felt like something was changing, that Adil seemed distant, even hostile. She reached for my hand, her touch gentle but her voice firm. "You're imagining things, Imran. He's just going through a rough patch. You know how he is, he'll come around." I wanted to believe her, to trust that the bonds of family were stronger than any passing resentment. But the doubt had already taken root. The business, too, began to feel different. Mr. Rahman still relied on me, still sought my advice, but there was a new formality in his tone, a carefulness that hadn't been there before. He'd ask Adil for his opinion more often, even when it was clear that Adil hadn't been paying attention. Sometimes I'd catch the two of them in the study, their conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. "Just catching up," Mr. Rahman would say. But the look on Adil's face told another story. I started to question myself. Was I overreacting? Was I so eager to belong that I was seeing threats where there were none? I tried to push the doubts aside, to focus on my work and my marriage. But the harder I tried, the more isolated I felt. Even Sarah, my confidant and anchor, seemed distracted. She'd spend hours on the phone with her mother, her voice low and urgent. When I asked if everything was all right, she'd force a smile and say, "Of course, just family things." The house itself seemed to change. The laughter that once filled the halls grew quieter, replaced by closed doors and hushed conversations. I'd find myself wandering from room to room, searching for the sense of belonging that had once come so easily. Even the garden, where Mr. Rahman and I had spent so many afternoons, felt different. The roses bloomed as always, but the air was heavy, the silence thick with things left unsaid. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I overheard Adil talking to a colleague. "Imran thinks he's the golden boy, but he's just lucky my father trusts him. That won't last forever." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they revealed a truth I hadn't wanted to face. Adil saw me as an outsider, a threat to his place in the family. I wondered how long he'd felt that way, and what he might do to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his. I tried to reach out to him, to bridge the growing gap. I invited him to lunch, suggested we work on a project together, but he always found an excuse to decline. The few times we did sit down together, our conversations were stilted, filled with awkward pauses and forced politeness. I missed the easy camaraderie we'd once shared, the sense that we were working toward a common goal. Sarah noticed the change too. She became more protective of Adil, quick to defend him whenever I voiced my concerns. "He's your brother," she'd say, her tone pleading. "You have to give him time." But time, it seemed, was only widening the distance between us. Looking back, I realize how naive I was, how desperately I clung to the belief that love and loyalty could overcome anything. I wanted so badly to keep the peace, to hold the family together, that I ignored the warning signs, the whispered conversations, the cold glances, the growing sense of isolation. I told myself that every family has its struggles, that this was just a rough patch we'd weather together. But the seeds of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, they began to grow. I started to question everything, my place in the family, my relationship with Sarah, even my own worth. The golden years were slipping away, replaced by a creeping sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I didn't know it then, but those small moments, the slights, the whispers, the forced smiles, were the first cracks in the foundation I'd worked so hard to build. And as the days passed, those cracks would only deepen, threatening to bring down everything I held dear. It's remarkable how a single moment can change the course of a life. A decision, a handshake, a signature on a page. For months, I'd been working on a deal that could take our family business to heights we'd only dreamed of. It was risky, ambitious, the kind of opportunity that comes once in a generation. I poured myself into it, working late into the night, running numbers until my eyes blurred, negotiating terms with a patience I didn't know I possessed. Every detail mattered. Every word in the contract weighed and measured. I wanted to prove, not just to Mr. Rahman, but to myself, that I was worthy of the trust he'd placed in me. The day the deal closed, the entire office buzzed with excitement. Our competitors had doubted us, whispered that we were overreaching, but I'd seen the potential, and now it was ours. Mr. Rahman called an emergency meeting, his face alight with pride. The boardroom was packed, executives, managers, even junior staff, all eager to hear the news. I stood at the back, exhausted but exhilarated as he began to speak. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "today marks a new chapter for our company. We have secured a partnership that will ensure our legacy for decades to come. And none of this would have been possible without the vision and dedication of one man, Imran." He turned to me, his eyes shining, and beckoned me forward. The room erupted in applause. I felt a surge of emotion, pride, relief, gratitude. For a moment, all the doubts and tensions faded, replaced by the simple joy of accomplishment. Mr. Rahman shook my hand, then pulled me into a brief, fatherly embrace. "You've made us all proud, Beta," he whispered. "This is your victory as much as mine." I glanced around the room, searching for Sarah. She smiled at me, her eyes brimming with tears. But when I looked at Adil, I saw something else, a tightness in his jaw, a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He clapped along with everyone else, but his gaze was cold, distant. Tried to catch his eye, to share the moment, but he looked away, his hands falling silent before the applause had even faded. That evening, the family gathered for dinner, a celebration in my honor. The table was laden with all my favorite dishes, the air thick with the scent of spices and fresh bread. Mr. Rahman raised a toast, his words generous and heartfelt. "To Imran, whose hard work and loyalty have brought us to this day. May we always stand together as a family." Glasses clinked, laughter filled the room, and for a while it felt as if the shadows had lifted. But beneath the surface, I sensed the tension. Adil barely touched his food, his answers clipped and distracted. When Sarah tried to draw him into conversation, he brushed her off, retreating into silence. I wanted to reach out, to reassure him that there was room for both of us, that his place in the family was secure. But every attempt was met with resistance, a wall I couldn't break through. After dinner, as the others drifted off to bed, I lingered in the study, savoring a rare moment of peace. The house was quiet, the only sound the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. I leaned back in my chair, letting the events of the day wash over me. I should have felt triumphant, but instead I was restless, uneasy. Success, I realized, can be as isolating as failure. Unable to sleep, I wandered through the darkened halls, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. As I passed by the kitchen, I heard voices, low, urgent, just beyond the door. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and listened. "He's taking over everything," Adil's voice sharp with frustration. "You see how they look at him? Like he's the savior of this family. What about me? What am I supposed to do? Just stand by and watch while he takes my place." A second voice, softer but no less intense. I recognized it as Sarah's. "Adil, you know it's not like that. Imran's worked hard. Father trusts him," Adil scoffed. Father's blinded by gratitude. He doesn't see what's happening. If we don't do something now, there won't be anything left for us. I'm not going to let him steal what's rightfully mine. My heart pounded in my chest. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear every word. Sarah's voice trembled. What are you saying? Can't. I'm saying we need a plan, Adil interrupted. We can't just sit back and hope things work out. If Imran wants to play the hero, let's see how he handles a little adversity. There was a long silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I waited, hoping for reassurance for Sarah to defend me, to put an end to whatever scheme Adil was proposing. But her answer was barely a whisper. Just, be careful, Adil. Don't do anything you'll regret. I stepped away from the door, my mind racing. The triumph of the day felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge that the people I loved most were plotting behind my back. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but something held me back. A fear of what I might hear, of what it would mean for our family. As I made my way back to my room, the house felt colder, the shadows deeper. The celebration was over, and in its place was a sense of foreboding I couldn't shake. I lay awake for hours, replaying the conversation in my mind, searching for meaning in every word, every pause. The turning point had come, but I didn't yet know which way the road would lead. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. There are moments in life when the world you've built, brick by careful brick, comes crashing down in a single shattering instant. I used to think betrayal was something that happened to other people, strangers in stories, faces in the news, men who'd failed to see the warning signs. I never imagined it would be my own family, the people I loved most who would turn the knife. The days after that overheard conversation passed in a haze of anxiety and suspicion. I tried to act normal, to keep up appearances, but every word, every glance felt loaded with hidden meaning. I watched Adil more closely, searching for signs of his plan, but he was careful, almost cordial, as if daring me to accuse him. Sarah, too, seemed distant, her affection replaced by a brittle politeness that stung more than outright anger. I wanted to ask her what she and Adil had discussed that night, but the words caught in my throat. I was afraid of the answer. Then, one morning, everything changed. I arrived at the office to find the atmosphere thick with tension. Whispers followed me down the hallway. Eyes darted away when I looked up. My assistant handed me a sealed envelope, her hands trembling. Mr. Rahman wants to see you in his office now. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I walked the familiar path to his door, my heart pounding. Inside, Mr. Rahman sat behind his desk, his face grave, a stack of papers spread before him. Adil stood by the window, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Sarah was there too, her eyes red-rimmed, refusing to meet mine. The air was heavy, suffocating. Imran, Mr. Rahman began, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. There are some serious allegations that have come to my attention. He slid the papers across the desk. Irregularities in the accounts. Missing funds. Unauthorized transactions. I'll trace back to your signature. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. Numbers, dates, signatures my own, but not mine. This isn't possible, I said, my voice shaking. There must be some mistake. I would never. Adil cut me off, his tone sharp. The evidence is right there. You've been siphoning money for months. Father trusted you, and you betrayed him. I looked to Sarah, desperate for support, for any sign that she believed me. But she only shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Imran, how could you? She whispered. The room spun. I tried to explain, to protest, but my words fell on deaf ears. Mr. Rahman's face was a mask of disappointment and anger. I brought you into this family, gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. Please, you have to believe me. I would never steal from you. Someone is setting me up, Adil snorted. Of course you'd say that. But the evidence doesn't lie, I pleaded with Sarah, my voice breaking. You know me? You know I would never do this. She looked away, her silence more damning than any accusation. Mr. Rahman stood, his hands trembling with rage. You are no longer welcome here, Imran. I want you out of this office, out of my house. Effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but the decision had already been made. Security was called. I was escorted from the building, my colleagues watching in stunned silence. Some looked away, others whispered behind their hands. I felt stripped bare, exposed, every shred of dignity torn away. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. How had it come to this? How had the people I loved turned against me so completely? I replayed every conversation, every decision, searching for the moment when trust had curdled into suspicion. I thought of the late nights in the study, the laughter around the dinner table, the promises we'd made to each other. All of it gone in an instant. When I arrived home, my things were already packed. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "It's better if you leave," she said quietly. "Father doesn't want to see you." I tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. "Please, Imran, just go." I gathered my belongings, each item a painful reminder of the life I was leaving behind. The house felt cold, unfamiliar, as if it had already begun to erase my presence. I paused in the hallway, looking back at the family photos on the wall, smiling faces, moments frozen in time. I wondered how long it would take for them to replace me in those memories, to rewrite the story, so that I was nothing more than a cautionary tale. I left without another word, the door closing behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. I drove aimlessly, the city blurring past until I found myself parked outside a small, cheap hotel. I checked in, barely registering the clerk's sympathetic glance. Alone in the tiny room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase at my feet, and let the reality of my situation sink in. I had lost everything: my job, my home, my family. The people I had trusted most had turned against me, convinced of my guilt. I felt hollow, as if some essential part of me had been ripped away. I tried to tell myself that the truth would come out, that justice would prevail, but the words rang hollow. I was alone, adrift, my sense of self shattered. In the days that followed, I tried to reach out, to Mr. Rahman, to Sarah, even to Adil. My calls went unanswered, my messages ignored. Friends who had once welcomed me into their homes now kept their distance, unwilling to get involved. I became a ghost, haunting the edges of my old life, watching as it moved on without me. I spent long hours staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, every choice. I wondered if there was something I could have done differently, some way to have prevented this. But the truth was, I had trusted too easily, loved too deeply, believed too completely in the goodness of those around me. And now I was paying the price. Betrayal is a peculiar kind of pain. It's not just the loss of trust, but the loss of self, the realization that everything you believed in was an illusion. I felt stripped of my identity, my purpose, my place in the world. I was no longer Imran, the trusted son, the devoted husband, the loyal friend. I was Imran, the accused, the outcast, the man who had lost everything, and yet, even in the depths of my despair, a small, stubborn spark remained. I didn't know how or when, but I vowed that I would find the truth. I would reclaim my name, my dignity, my place in the world. For now, though, all I could do was survive. One day, one breath at a time. There is a particular kind of silence that settles in after you've been cast out. A silence that is not just the absence of sound, but the echo of everything you've lost. My new apartment was nothing like the home I'd left behind. It was small, barely furnished, the walls thin enough that I could hear the muffled lives of strangers on the other side. The kitchen was cramped, the windows overlooked a busy street, and the only light came from a flickering bulb that cast long, uncertain shadows across the floor. I unpacked my suitcase in slow motion, each item a reminder of the life I no longer belonged to. A faded photograph of Sarah and me on our wedding day, a watch Mr. Rahman had given me after my first big deal, a tie Adil had once picked out for my birthday. I set them on the narrow shelf above the bed, unsure whether they were keepsakes or evidence of my own foolishness. The days blurred together, each one indistinguishable from the last. I woke up to the sound of traffic instead of birdsong, made tea for one instead of a family, and ate my meals in silence. I tried to keep busy searching for work, sending out resumes, but my reputation had already been tainted. Word travels fast in our community, and no one wanted to be associated with a man accused of betraying his own family. Doors that had once been open to me were now firmly shut. I wandered the city, a ghost in my own life, haunted by memories that refused to fade. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led me here. I thought of the laughter that used to fill our home, the warmth of Sarah's hand in mine, the pride in Mr. Rahman's eyes when he introduced me as his son. I wondered if they missed me, if they ever questioned the story they'd been told. But the silence from their end was absolute. I was alone, not just in this apartment but in the world. Sometimes I would catch myself reaching for my phone, my fingers hovering over Sarah's number. I wanted to hear her voice, to ask her how she could believe I was capable of such betrayal. But I never called. I knew what she would say, or worse, that she wouldn't answer at all. The pain of her absence was sharper than any accusation. I missed her laughter, her quiet strength, the way she used to reassure me when I doubted myself. Now all I had were memories, and even those felt like they belonged to someone else. I tried to find comfort in routine. I cleaned the apartment, cooked simple meals, forced myself to go for walks, but everywhere I went I saw reminders of the life I'd lost. Couples holding hands in the park, families gathered around dinner tables in restaurants, fathers playing with their children on the sidewalk. I felt invisible, as if I'd been erased from the world I once knew. The loneliness was suffocating, a weight that pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. Self-doubt crept in, insidious and relentless. I began to question everything, my choices, my worth, even my own memories. Had I missed the signs? Had I been too trusting, too eager to belong? Was there something in me that invited betrayal? I replayed every conversation with Adil, every argument with Sarah, searching for clues I might have overlooked. The more I searched, the more lost I felt. There were moments when anger flared, hot and blinding. I would pace the apartment, fists clenched, cursing the injustice of it all. How could they believe I was capable of such treachery? How could they turn their backs on me so easily? But the anger always faded, leaving only exhaustion and a hollow ache. I was tired of fighting, tired of hoping for a call that never came, tired of being the villain in a story I hadn't written. I tried to distract myself with books, television, anything to fill the hours, but nothing could drown out the memories. I remembered the first time Mr. Rahman had called me son, the pride I'd felt, the sense of belonging. I remembered the night Sarah and I had stayed up talking about our dreams, the promises we'd made to each other. I wondered if she remembered too, or if those memories had been tainted by doubt and suspicion. Sometimes I would walk past our old house, unable to resist the pull of the past. I'd stand across the street, hidden in the shadows, watching the lights flicker in the windows. I imagined them inside, going about their lives as if I'd never existed. I wondered if they ever spoke of me, if my name was now forbidden, a ghost haunting the edges of their conversations. The pain of being replaced was sharper than any wound. I was no longer a part of their story, no longer welcome at their table. In the quiet of my apartment, I began to understand the true cost of exile. It wasn't just the loss of home or family or reputation. It was the loss of self, the slow erosion of identity. I was no longer Imran, the son, the husband, the trusted confidant. I was Imran, the outcast, the man who had been judged and found wanting. The loneliness was a constant companion, a shadow that followed me everywhere. And yet, even in the depths of isolation, a small part of me refused to give in. I clung to the hope that the truth would one day come to light, that I would find a way to reclaim my place in the world. For now, though, all I could do was endure, one day at a time, one breath at a time, holding on to the fragments of who I used to be, and praying that I would one day be whole again. There are nights when the darkness feels endless, when the weight of loneliness presses so heavily on your chest that you wonder if you'll ever breathe freely again. In those first weeks of exile, I found myself slipping further into that darkness, each day a little heavier than the last. The world outside my window moved on, cars honked, children played, shopkeepers opened their shutters with the same hopeful energy I once had. But inside my apartment, time seemed to stand still, every hour stretching into the next, empty and unyielding. I stopped answering calls, not that there were many. I let the mail pile up, unopened, on the kitchen counter. I ate only when hunger became unbearable, and even then the food tasted like nothing. Sleep eluded me, my mind a carousel of regrets and accusations. I replayed every moment with Sarah, every conversation with Mr. Rahman, every attempt to reach out to Adil. I wondered if I'd ever truly belonged, or if I'd simply been a convenient outsider, easy to discard when the time came. One evening, as rain lashed against the window, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand. The thought crept in, quiet and insidious. Would anyone notice if I simply disappeared? Would the world pause, even for a moment, to mourn my absence? I felt invisible, erased, as if my life had been reduced to a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. The pain was sharp, but the numbness that followed was worse, a hollow ache that made even despair feel like a luxury. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in that fog, before a knock at the door startled me back to the present. It was late and I wasn't expecting anyone. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something, curiosity, desperation, hope, propelled me to my feet. I opened the door to find a familiar face, older now but unmistakable. Farhan, my friend from university days, the one person who had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Imran? He said, his voice a mixture of surprise and concern. I heard what happened. I've been trying to reach you. I tried to muster a smile, but it faltered. I'm not much for company these days. He stepped inside anyway, shaking the rain from his coat. Too bad. I brought tea. He held up a thermos, the same brand we used to share during late-night study sessions. The scent of cardamom and ginger filled the room, a small comfort in the midst of my despair. We sat at the tiny kitchen table, steam rising from our cups. For a while we said nothing, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. Farhan looked around, taking in the bare walls, the unopened mail, the shadows under my eyes. "You look like hell," he said gently. I laughed, a brittle sound. "I feel worse." He nodded, his gaze steady. "I know it's bad, Imran, but you're not alone. You never were." I wanted to believe him, but the words caught in my throat. Everyone else seems to think I'm guilty. Even Sarah, even Mr. Rahman. Farhan shook his head. "People believe what they want to believe. But I know you. I know what kind of man you are. You've always put others first, always tried to do the right thing. That hasn't changed no matter what anyone says." His words cut through the fog, a small shaft of light in the darkness. I felt something shift inside me, a flicker of hope, fragile but real. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to remember who I was before the accusations, before the exile. I remembered the laughter we'd shared, the dreams we'd chased, the promises we'd made to ourselves and each other. Farhan reached across the table, his hand warm and solid on mine. "You can't let them define you, Imran. You can't let their betrayal erase everything you've built. You're stronger than this. You always have been." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. The contrast was stark. The coldness of betrayal, the warmth of friendship. I realized how much I'd missed this, the simple comfort of being seen, of being understood. For so long I'd been drowning in my own pain, convinced that I was alone. But Farhan's presence reminded me that there were still people who cared, still reasons to keep going. We talked late into the night, sharing stories from the past, laughing at old jokes, mourning the losses we'd both endured. Farhan told me about his own struggles, the setbacks he'd faced, the times he'd wanted to give up. "But I didn't," he said, his eyes shining with determination. "And neither will you." When he finally left, the apartment felt a little less empty, the silence less oppressive. I stood at the window, watching the rain ease into a gentle drizzle. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I knew the road ahead would be hard. I knew there would be days when the darkness threatened to swallow me whole. But I also knew that I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. The warmth of friendship, the memory of better days, the stubborn spark of self-worth, they were still there, waiting to be kindled as I lay down to sleep. I made a promise to myself. I would not let despair define me. I would find a way back, not just for myself, but for the man I used to be, the man my friend still believed I could become. And in that promise, I found the strength to face another day. It's a strange thing, the way hope can return when you least expect it, quiet at first, like the faintest ember in a bed of ashes. After Farhan's visit, something inside me shifted. The world outside hadn't changed. I was still alone in my small apartment, still shunned by the people who once called me family. But the way I saw myself began to change. I remembered that I had survived worse before, that I was not defined by the accusations or the silence that followed. I was still Imran, and I still had something to offer. The first step was the hardest. I sat at my kitchen table, a blank notebook in front of me, and forced myself to write down everything I knew about business, about negotiation, about building trust. These were the skills I had once poured into Mr. Rahman's company, the same skills that had helped the family business grow. I realized that even if they had cast me out, they couldn't take away what I'd learned or the man I had become. I thought back to my childhood, to the cramped apartment where I'd grown up. My father was a tailor, a quiet man with rough hands and a gentle heart. He used to say, "Son, when the world turns its back on you, you turn to your work. Let your hands remind you of your worth." I remembered watching him at his sewing machine, piecing together scraps of fabric into something whole and beautiful. He never complained, never gave in to bitterness even when customers failed to pay or neighbors whispered behind his back. He just kept working, his resolve as steady as the needle in his hand. Those memories gave me strength. I decided to start small, offering my services as a consultant to local businesses, shops, startups, anyone who needed advice. At first it was slow. People were wary, hesitant to trust a man with a tarnished reputation. But I refused to give up. I knocked on doors, handed out business cards, offered free consultations just to prove my worth. Some turned me away, but a few listened. I helped a struggling grocer renegotiate his supplier contracts, showed a young couple how to market their bakery online, advised a mechanic on managing his cash flow. Word began to spread, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. Imran, the man who had built a business empire, was helping the little guys now. Each small victory reignited my determination. I remembered another lesson from my father. Success is not measured by what you have, but by what you give. I found joy in helping others, in seeing their businesses thrive. It was a different kind of satisfaction than the one I'd known in the boardroom. Quieter, perhaps, but more honest. I was building something new, not just for myself, but for people who needed a second chance as much as I did. There were setbacks, of course. Some clients disappeared without paying. Others doubted my motives. There were days when the old doubts crept in, when I wondered if I was just fooling myself. But each time I pushed through, remembering the resilience my father had shown, the faith Farhan had in me, the man I wanted to become. One evening, as I was closing up my makeshift office, a corner of a friend's cafe, I found myself staring at the city skyline, the lights twinkling against the dark. I thought of Sarah, of Mr. Rahman, of the life I'd lost. The pain was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was more than their accusations, more than the sum of my failures. I was Imran, and I was still standing. I began to dream again, to imagine what might be possible if I kept going. I started making plans, scribbling ideas in my notebook late into the night. There was a bigger vision forming, something that went beyond simple survival. I wanted to create a network, a place where people like me, cast out or overlooked, could find support and guidance. I wanted to prove, not just to my old family, but to myself, that I could build something lasting from the ashes of what I'd lost. I kept these plans close, sharing them with no one, not even Farhan. There was power in secrecy, in nurturing a dream before the world could judge it. But I worked harder than ever, driven by a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Every new client, every small success, was a step toward something bigger, something that would one day make the people who doubted me sit up and take notice. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear my father's voice in my mind, steady and reassuring. When you have nothing left, you have your resolve. That is enough. I clung to those words, letting them guide me through the uncertainty. I was no longer waiting for someone to rescue me, no longer hoping for forgiveness from those who had turned their backs. I was forging my own path, one hard-earned step at a time. The world had tried to break me, but it had only made me stronger. I was not finished, not by a long shot. There was more to come, more to prove, more to build. And as I looked out at the city, alive with possibility, I felt the spark of resolve burn brighter than ever. What I was planning, I kept to myself. But soon the world would see. There's a certain dignity in starting over, a quiet strength that comes from building something with your own hands, brick by brick, when no one is watching. My consultancy began as a whisper, a humble offering in a world that had already written me off. But as the weeks passed, that whisper grew into something more, a steady hum of hope, a chorus of small victories that stitched my days together. At first, my clients were few and far between. A grocer struggling to keep his shelves stocked, a widowed seamstress trying to balance her books, a young man with a dream of opening his own repair shop. They came to me not because of my past, but in spite of it. Some had heard the rumors, the stories of my fall from grace, but desperation has a way of making people look past gossip. I listened to their worries, pored over their ledgers, and offered advice that was practical, honest, and rooted in experience. I didn't promise miracles, just a way forward, one step at a time. Slowly, things began to change. The grocer renegotiated his contracts and started turning a profit. The seamstress learned to market her work online, attracting new customers from across the city. The young repairman opened his shop, and within months he was hiring his first employee. Each success was a balm to my wounded pride, a reminder that I still had value, that I could still make a difference. Word spread quietly, as it always does in our community. People began to seek me out, not just for business advice, but for guidance, for encouragement, for a listening ear. I found myself mentoring a group of young entrepreneurs, meeting them in the back room of the cafe that had become my unofficial office. We shared stories, celebrated each other's wins, and commiserated over setbacks. For the first time since my exile, I felt a sense of belonging, not as a son-in-law or a husband, but as myself. The gratitude I received was different from the praise I'd known in my old life. It was quieter, more genuine. A loaf of fresh bread left on my doorstep, a handwritten note of thanks, a shy smile from a client who had found her footing. These gestures meant more to me than any public accolade. They were proof that I was rebuilding my reputation, not through grand gestures, but through steady, honest work. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I began to take on bigger projects, helping small shops band together to negotiate better deals, advising a local school on fundraising, even consulting for a struggling charity. Each new challenge reminded me of the skills I'd honed in Mr. Rahman's company, the lessons I'd learned at his side. I realized that in losing everything, I had gained something far more precious, the freedom to define myself on my own terms. There were still moments of doubt, of course. Sometimes late at night, I would catch myself wondering if any of this mattered, if I would ever truly escape the shadow of my past. But then I would remember the faces of the people I'd helped, the small businesses that were thriving because of my guidance. I was no longer haunted by the need for approval from those who had cast me out. I was building something new, something that belonged to me alone. One afternoon, as I was finishing up a meeting with a group of shop owners, I noticed a familiar figure lingering by the door. It was Farhan, my old friend, who had never once let me forget my worth. He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "You're making a difference, Imran. People are starting to talk." "A good way." I shrugged, a little embarrassed by the praise. "I'm just doing what I can." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Sometimes that's all it takes." As the weeks turned into months, my consultancy became a lifeline for many. I watched as my clients grew in confidence, as their businesses flourished, as they began to help others in turn. It was a quiet comeback. Nothing flashy or dramatic, but it was real. And it was mine. Then one evening, as I was closing up the cafe, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The words were simple, but they sent a jolt through me. "Mr. Rahman requests your presence at the family home. Tomorrow evening." "It is important." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I hadn't set foot in that house since the day I was cast out. I didn't know what awaited me. An apology, a confrontation, another accusation. Part of me wanted to ignore the message, to protect the fragile peace I had built. But another part, the part that still longed for closure, knew I couldn't turn away. As I lay awake that night, memories flooded back, the laughter around the dinner table, the pride in Mr. Rahman's eyes, the pain of betrayal. I wondered what had changed, what could possibly be so important after all this time. The invitation was a mystery, a door opening onto a future I couldn't yet see. I resolved to go, not as the broken man they had cast out, but as the person I had become, stronger, wiser, and no longer defined by their judgment. Whatever awaited me behind that door, I would face it on my own terms. The quiet comeback was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming my story, one chapter at a time. And as I prepared for the meeting that could change everything, I felt a sense of anticipation, a reminder that sometimes the most important moments come when you least expect them. The drive to the family home felt longer than I remembered, every turn heavy with memories. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white as I rehearsed what I might say, how I might react. I told myself I was ready, that I had nothing left to lose. But as the house came into view, its windows glowing softly in the dusk, I felt the old ache return, the longing for a place I once called home. The front door opened before I could knock. Mr. Rahman stood there, older, wearier, but still commanding. He didn't smile, but he didn't turn me away either. "Come in, Imran," he said, his voice low. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of cardamom and old wood washing over me. The house was quieter than I remembered, the air thick with unspoken words. We gathered in the study, the same room where I'd once been welcomed as a son. Adil was already there, pacing nervously, his face drawn and pale. Sarah sat in the corner, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes red from crying. The tension was palpable, every breath measured, every glance loaded. Mr. Rahman wasted no time. He gestured to a stack of papers on the desk. "Imran, I asked you here because I owe you the truth. We've discovered serious discrepancies in the company's accounts. Transactions authorized by Adil, not you. Funds missing, deals gone sour, debts hidden from the board. It's all here." Adil's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "That's not true. You can't pin this on me. Imran's the one who—" Mr. Rahman cut him off, his voice steely. "Enough, Adil. The auditors have traced everything. You used Imran's name, his signature, to cover your tracks. You betrayed this family, not him." The room fell silent. I looked at Adil, searching for the brother I'd once tried to help, but all I saw was fear and resentment. He avoided my gaze, his bravado crumbling. Sarah's shoulders shook as she tried to hold back tears. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I could have lashed out, demanded apologies, reveled in their regret, but I found no satisfaction in their pain. I had lost too much to gloat now. Instead, I spoke quietly, my voice even. "I never wanted any of this. I only ever wanted to help to be part of this family. I hope you find a way to heal from this for all your sakes." Mr. Rahman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I am sorry, Imran. I should have trusted you. I let my fears blind me to the truth." I nodded, accepting his words but not letting them define me. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. Adil slumped into a chair, defeated. The weight of his choices seemed to settle on him all at once. Sarah finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Imran, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I let my loyalty to my brother cloud my judgment." I met her gaze, feeling the old pain but also a strange sense of release. "We can't change the past, Sarah, but we can choose what we do with what's left." The meeting ended with no grand gestures, no dramatic reconciliations. Just the truth laid bare for all to see. As I stood to leave, Mr. Rahman reached for my hand. "If you ever want to come back, the door is open." I hesitated, then shook my head gently. "Thank you, but I have my own path now." I walked out of the house into the cool night air, my heart heavy but unburdened. Justice, I realized, is not always about punishment. Sometimes it's about clarity, about facing the truth with dignity and letting go of what no longer serves you. As I drove away, I wondered what would become of the family I'd once fought so hard to protect. The answers were uncertain, the wounds still fresh. But for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace with my own story, ready to face whatever came next. In the days that followed the confrontation, the truth spread through the family and the business like a slow, cleansing fire. There was no public scandal, no shouting in the streets, just a quiet reckoning, the kind that leaves everyone changed. Mr. Rahman moved quickly, calling emergency meetings with the board, reviewing every document, every transaction. The evidence was irrefutable. Adil's mismanagement had cost the company dearly, and the trust that once held the family together was now a fragile thing, trembling in the aftermath. Adil tried to defend himself at first, spinning stories, blaming others, even pleading with Sarah to intervene. But the facts spoke louder than any excuse. The board voted to remove him from all positions of authority, and Mr. Rahman, his face lined with regret, made the decision to send Adil away for a time, hoping distance might teach him what pride and privilege never had. The house that had once been filled with laughter and ambition now echoed with the lessons of humility and consequence. For Mr. Rahman, the consequences were more subtle, but no less painful. He had to face the board, the employees, the community, and admit that he had been deceived, not by a stranger but by his own son. The shame weighed heavily on him, and I saw in his eyes the sorrow of a man who had trusted too much and listened too little. He reached out to me, not with the authority of a patriarch, but with the humility of a father who had lost his way. One afternoon he called me to his office. The room felt smaller than I remembered, the air thick with memories. He stood as I entered, his hands trembling slightly. "Imran," he began, his voice rough, "I cannot undo what has been done. I cannot erase the pain I caused you, or the injustice you suffered. But I can offer you what is rightfully yours. The company needs you. The family needs you. Will you come back?" For a moment I was silent, the weight of his words settling over me. I thought of all the years I had given to this family, the dreams I had built and lost, the nights I had spent alone, questioning my worth. I looked at Mr. Rahman, not as the man who had cast me out, but as a father who was finally asking for forgiveness. "I appreciate your offer," I said quietly, "but I cannot accept. I have found a new path, one that allows me to help others, to build something of my own. I am grateful for everything you taught me, for the trust you once placed in me, but I cannot go back to who I was. I have changed, and so must we all." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "You are a better man than I ever was, Imran. I hope you can forgive me." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "I already have. We are all human, Mr. Rahman. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do with the lessons we learn." Sarah reached out to me as well, her voice trembling with remorse. "I was wrong, Imran. I let my fears and my loyalty to Adil blind me to the truth. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved so fiercely, and saw not the betrayer, but a person struggling to make sense of her own pain. "I forgive you, Sarah, but forgiveness does not mean forgetting. We must both move forward, wiser and stronger for what we have endured." The company began to heal slowly as wounds do. Employees who had once whispered behind my back now greeted me with respect, grateful for the guidance I had given them in the past. Some even sought me out for advice, and I offered it freely, with no expectation of reward. I watched from a distance as Mr. Rahman worked to rebuild what had been lost. this time with humility and openness, inviting others to share in the responsibility. Adil, for his part, disappeared from the family's daily life. I heard he had taken a job in another city, far from the shadows of his mistakes. I wished him no ill will. I hoped in time he would find his own redemption, that he would learn the value of honesty and the cost of pride. I carried no bitterness toward him, only a quiet hope that he would one day understand the pain he had caused, and use it to become a better man. As for me, I poured my energy into my consultancy, helping small businesses and young entrepreneurs find their footing. The work was honest, the rewards simple but profound. I found joy in the success of others, in the knowledge that I was making a difference, however small. My reputation, once tarnished, was slowly restored not through grand gestures, but through steady, consistent effort. There were moments when I missed the old life, the camaraderie, the sense of belonging, the pride of being part of something larger than myself. But I knew that true dignity comes not from titles or positions, but from the choices we make when no one is watching. I had chosen self-respect over revenge, forgiveness over bitterness, growth over stagnation. In the end, justice was served not by punishment, but by truth. The family learned the cost of misplaced trust, and I learned the value of letting go. There was no triumph, no victory parade, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had survived, that I had rebuilt, that I had found peace. And as I walked away from the house that had once been my world, I felt lighter, unburdened by the past. I was free, not because I had won, but because I had chosen to forgive, to move forward, to live with dignity. That, I realized, was the truest justice of all. It was a quiet afternoon when Sarah called. Her voice on the line was hesitant, almost fragile, as if she feared I might hang up before she could say what she needed to say. I listened in silence, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and longing. She asked if we could meet just once to talk, not as husband and wife, not as adversaries, but as two people who had shared a life and lost their way. I agreed, unsure of what I hoped to find in the ruins of our past. We met at a small park on the edge of the city, a place we used to visit in the early days of our marriage. The trees were just beginning to turn, their leaves a patchwork of gold and crimson. Sarah was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench beneath an old oak, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, filled with all the words we'd left unsaid. Finally, Sarah broke it, her voice trembling. "Imran, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't begin to cover what I've done, but I need you to hear it. I'm so sorry." I sat beside her, leaving a careful space between us. "Why, Sarah? Why did you believe him? Why didn't you come to me?" She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was scared. Adil was my brother, and I thought he needed me. I let my loyalty to him blind me to what was right in front of me. And when the accusations started, I was so afraid of losing everything that I convinced myself they must be true. I didn't want to see the truth because it was easier to believe the lie." Her words cut deep, but I could hear the pain in them, the pain of a woman who had lost as much as I had. We both lost, Sarah, not just each other, but ourselves. We let ambition and fear drive a wedge between us. She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I've spent so many nights replaying everything, wondering how I could have been so blind. I let my pride and my need to protect my family destroy the one person who always stood by me. I don't expect you to forgive me, Imran. I just needed you to know how sorry I am." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the woman who had betrayed me, but the woman I had once loved, the woman who had laughed with me, dreamed with me, built a life with me. I saw her pain, her regret, and I felt my own anger begin to soften. "I do forgive you, Sarah," I said quietly, "not because what happened doesn't matter, but because holding on to the pain will only keep us both trapped. I forgive you for believing the worst, for letting fear win, but I also forgive myself for not seeing how lost we both were." She let out a shaky breath, relief and sorrow mingling in her eyes. "Thank you. I don't deserve it, but thank you." We sat in silence for a while, watching the wind scatter leaves across the grass. I thought about our marriage, about the dreams we'd shared and the ways we'd let them slip away. "We were so focused on building a future," I said, "that we forgot to take care of each other. We let ambition become more important than trust. I don't blame you for wanting to protect your brother, but I wish you'd trusted me enough to ask for the truth." Sarah nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wish I had too. I wish I'd been braver." I turned to her, my tone gentle but firm. "We can't go back, Sarah. Too much has happened. I need to move forward, to find out who I am without all the old wounds. I hope you can do the same. She looked at me, searching my face for something, maybe hope, maybe absolution. Do you think we could ever be friends again? Not now, maybe, but someday. I considered her question, weighing it carefully. Maybe. But right now I need space. I need to heal, to rebuild my life on my own terms. I hope you understand. She nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. I do. I want you to be happy, Imran. You deserve that. We stood. The distance between us both, a boundary and a kindness. I reached out, squeezing her hand gently. So do you, Sarah. We both deserve a chance to start over. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace. The pain was still there, but it was softer now, dulled by the balm of forgiveness. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be days when the old wounds ached and the memories threatened to pull me back. But I also knew that I had taken the first step toward healing, not just for myself, but for both of us. Forgiveness, I realized, is not about forgetting or excusing the past. It's about letting go of the anger, the blame, the need for retribution. It's about choosing to move forward, even when the path is uncertain. I had set my boundaries, chosen my own well-being, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a piece of myself that I thought was lost forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the park in golden light, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was no longer defined by betrayal or loss. I was Imran, wounded, yes, but healing, and for the first time in a long time, I believe that was enough. There's a quiet power in starting again, not for yourself, but for others. After the dust of the past had settled, I found myself searching for meaning beyond my own healing. I had spent so long trying to prove my worth to a family that no longer needed me, to a world that had turned its back. But as the days grew brighter, and my wounds began to close, I realized that my story could be more than a cautionary tale. It could be a lantern for those still wandering in the dark. It began with a simple idea. I noticed the young men in my neighborhood, some drifting between odd jobs, others sitting on park benches, their eyes clouded with the same uncertainty I had once known. They reminded me of myself years ago, hungry for guidance, desperate for a chance to be seen. I remembered my father's words, the lessons he'd taught me with calloused hands and quiet wisdom. When you have something to give it. That's how you build a legacy, so I reached out. I started small, inviting a few of them to join me at the local community center. We met in a sunlit room with peeling paint and mismatched chairs, a far cry from the boardrooms I once knew. But there was honesty in that space, a sense of possibility that felt more real than any title or office. I listened to their stories of disappointment, of betrayal, of dreams deferred. I saw in their faces the same longing for dignity, for a place to belong. We talked about business, yes, but also about life. I taught them what I knew, how to write a business plan, how to negotiate with confidence, how to stand tall even when the world tries to shrink you. But more than that, I tried to show them that failure is not the end, that being cast out can be the beginning of something new. I shared my own story, not as a hero, but as a man who had lost everything and found a way to begin again. Slowly, the group grew. Word spread, and soon the room was filled with young men from all walks of life, some with big dreams, others just looking for a reason to hope. We celebrated every small victory, a new job, a successful interview, a business idea that finally took flight. I watched as they began to believe in themselves, as they lifted each other up, as they discovered the strength that comes from community. One evening, after a particularly lively session, I lingered in the empty room, the echoes of laughter still hanging in the air. I looked at the circle of chairs, at the one in the center that always seemed to remain empty until someone new arrived. It struck me then. The empty chair was no longer a symbol of loss, but of welcome. It was a place for the next person who needed a chance, a reminder that there is always room for one more at the table of hope. I thought back to the grand dining table in Mr. Rahman's house, to the chair that had once been mine. For so long I had mourned its emptiness, believing it was the measure of my worth. But now I saw that true legacy is not about holding on to a seat of honor, but about making space for others to find their own. The chair in the community center was filled and refilled, each new story adding to the tapestry of resilience we were weaving together. The work gave me purpose, a sense of belonging that was deeper and more enduring than anything I had known before. I found joy in their successes, pride in their growth, and comfort in the knowledge that my pain had not been wasted. I was building something lasting, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever felt invisible or unworthy. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of my old self in their eyes. The uncertainty, the hunger for approval, the fear of being left behind. I would sit beside them, listen without judgment, and remind them that their story was still being written. You are more than your mistakes, I would say. You are more than what others see. You have the power to create your own legacy. As the seasons changed, so did I. The bitterness that had once threatened to consume me was replaced by gratitude for the lessons learned, for the second chances, for the opportunity to give back. I no longer needed validation from those who had doubted me. I had found my place not at the head of a table, but in the circle of lives I was helping to shape. On the anniversary of my exile, I hosted a dinner at the community center. The room was filled with laughter, with stories of triumph and struggle, with the warmth of belonging. As I looked around at the faces shining with hope, I realized that the empty chair was now a symbol of everything I had gained, a legacy not of power or prestige, but of compassion and courage. I raised my glass, my voice steady and full. To new beginnings, to second chances, and to the empty chair, may it always be waiting for the next dreamer, the next believer, the next soul in need of a place to belong. In that moment I knew I had finally come home. My legacy was not the fortune I had helped build, nor the family that had cast me out, but the lives I had touched, the dignity I had helped restore, the hope I had kindled in the hearts of others. The empty chair was no longer a reminder of what I had lost, but a promise of all that was still possible. And so, with every new story, every new face, every new beginning, I continued to build a legacy of kindness, of resilience, of hope, a legacy that would endure long after the pain of the past had faded, lighting the way for those who would come after me. The room is alive with laughter, the kind that rises from deep within and fills every corner with warmth. Tonight, the long table at the community center is crowded with faces, some familiar, some new, all shining with the quiet pride of people who have weathered storms and found their way back to hope. Plates are passed, stories are shared, and the air is thick with the scent of home-cooked food and the promise of belonging. I sit at the center, not as the head of the table, but as a part of the circle. Around me are the young men I've mentored, their eyes bright with possibility, their voices weaving together tales of struggle and triumph. Farhan is here, his laughter booming as he recounts the story of our university days. The seamstress whose business now flourishes sits beside the grocer, who once thought he'd lose everything. Each person at this table carries a story of loss, of betrayal, of starting over. And yet tonight, none of us are defined by what we've lost. We are defined by what we've chosen to build together. As I look around, I feel a deep sense of peace. The empty chair that once haunted me is now just another seat, waiting for the next person who needs a place to belong. I think of the journey that brought me here, the pain of exile, the slow work of healing, the courage it took to forgive and begin again. I remember the nights I thought I would never find my way back, the days when hope seemed like a distant dream, and yet here I am, surrounded by a new family, a new legacy, a table full of second chances. I raise my glass, my voice steady and full of gratitude. To all of you, thank you for reminding me that dignity is not something others can give or take away. It's something we choose every day, in the way we treat ourselves and each other. This table is proof that no one's story ends with betrayal or loss. We are all more than the worst thing that's happened to us. The room grows quiet, each person holding their own memories, their own scars. I meet their eyes one by one, and see the reflection of my own journey in theirs. If you're listening to this wherever you are, whatever you've been through, know this: your story isn't over. There's always a seat at the table for those who choose dignity, for those who refuse to let pain define them. You are not alone. You are not finished. There is still so much more to come. The laughter returns, the stories continue, and the table, my table, our table, remains full. In this moment, I know that healing is possible, that hope can be rebuilt, and that every ending is just the beginning of something new.